We live in a world that increasingly celebrates conformity, a world that seeks to flatten the peaks of human potential into a homogeneous landscape of mediocrity. But there are those among us who refuse to be molded by the collective, who choose to walk a solitary path. These are the lone wolves, the individuals who stand apart from the pack, not out of arrogance or disdain, but out of a deep-seated need to pursue their own truth, their own destiny. The lone wolf syndrome is not a pathology, as some would have you believe. It's not a defect to be corrected or a wound to be healed. It is, in fact, a vital aspect of the human experience, a crucible in which exceptional individuals are forged. But what drives these lone wolves? What is the secret ingredient that sets them apart from the masses?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
To understand this, we must first recognize that the world is not a simple place. It's a complex, hierarchical structure filled with competing interests, conflicting ideologies, and ever-shifting power dynamics. In this chaotic milieu, most people seek safety in numbers, in the comfort of the collective. They surrender their individuality for the promise of security, for the illusion of belonging. But the lone wolf sees through this illusion. They understand, at a fundamental level, that true security can only come from within, from the cultivation of competence and the pursuit of truth. They recognize that the collective, for all its promises of safety, is often a breeding ground for mediocrity, a place where individual potential is sacrificed on the altar of conformity. This realization is the first step on the path of the lone wolf. It's a painful awakening, a moment of clarity that often comes at great personal cost. The lone wolf must be willing to face the disapproval of others, to endure the loneliness that comes with standing apart. They must be prepared to question everything, to challenge the accepted wisdom, to push against the tide of popular opinion. But this is not a path of nihilism or rebellion for its own sake. The lone wolf is not driven by a desire to destroy or to dominate. Instead, they are propelled by a deep-seated need to understand, to explore, to push the boundaries of what is possible. They are seekers of truth, explorers of the human psyche, pioneers of thought and action. The secret ingredient that sets these exceptional individuals apart is not intelligence, though many of them possess it in abundance. It's not creativity, though that too is often a hallmark of the lone wolf. No, the secret ingredient is something far more fundamental, far more powerful. It's a combination of courage, integrity, and an unshakable commitment to personal growth. Courage, because the path of the lone wolf is not an easy one. It requires the strength to stand alone, to face the unknown, to confront one's own limitations and fears. The lone wolf must be willing to take risks, to fail, to pick themselves up and try again. They must have the courage to question their own beliefs, to admit when they are wrong, to change course when necessary. Integrity, because without it, the lone wolf becomes nothing more than a rebel without a cause, a narcissist seeking attention. True integrity means aligning one's actions with one's values, even when, especially when, it's difficult or unpopular. It means speaking the truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable or inconvenient. It means taking responsibility for one's choices and their consequences. And finally, an unshakable commitment to personal growth. The lone wolf understands that stagnation is death, that comfort is the enemy of progress. They are constantly pushing themselves, challenging their own assumptions, seeking out new experiences and perspectives. They understand that true wisdom comes not from knowing all the answers, but from asking better questions. This commitment to growth is what separates the true lone wolf from the mere contrarian or the social outcast. The lone wolf is not running away from society, but running towards a higher version of themselves. They understand that by becoming the best version of themselves, they can ultimately contribute more to the collective. But here's the paradox. The more the lone wolf develops these qualities, the more they stand out from the crowd. And the more they stand out, the more they are likely to face resistance, criticism, and even hostility from those around them. This is the price of exceptionalism, the burden that comes with standing apart. How do we navigate this paradox? How do we remain true to ourselves while still functioning within society? How do we balance our need for individuality with our innate human desire for connection and belonging? These are not easy questions to answer. They require deep introspection, a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world around us. They require us to grapple with the fundamental tension between individuality and community, between self-actualization and social harmony. But grapple with them we must, for in this struggle lies the key to our growth, both as individuals and as a society. We must learn to embrace the lone wolf within us, to nurture that spark of individuality that makes each of us unique. At the same time, we must find ways to channel that individuality in service of something greater than ourselves. This is the challenge that faces us, the task that lies ahead. It's a journey that will take us to the very depths of our being, that will test us in ways we can scarcely imagine. But it's a journey worth taking, for at its end lies not just personal fulfillment, but the possibility of a society that can truly harness the full potential of every individual. In the next part of our exploration, we'll delve deeper into the psychological underpinnings of the lone wolf syndrome, examining the forces that shape these exceptional individuals and the strategies they use to navigate a world that often seems hostile to their very existence. We'll explore the role of trauma, the importance of self-reflection, and the power of purpose in shaping the lone wolf's journey. The lone wolf is not born, but made. This is a crucial point that we must understand if we're to grasp the true nature of exceptionalism. The journey of the lone wolf often begins in pain, in a moment of profound disillusionment or betrayal that shatters their faith in the collective. This trauma, this wound, becomes the catalyst for a radical re-evaluation of their place in the world. But trauma alone does not create the lone wolf. Many people experience trauma, yet they retreat further into the safety of the collective, seeking comfort in the familiar. What sets the lone wolf apart is their response to this trauma. Instead of allowing it to break them, they use it as fuel for transformation. They turn their pain into purpose, their wounds into wisdom. This transformation is not a single event, but an ongoing process. It requires a level of self-reflection that most people find uncomfortable, even terrifying. The lone wolf must be willing to confront their own darkness, to examine their motivations, their fears, their deepest desires. They must be willing to question everything they thought they knew about themselves and the world. This process of self-reflection is not narcissism. It's not about dwelling on one's own thoughts and feelings for their own sake. It's about developing a deep understanding of oneself as a tool for understanding the world. The lone wolf recognizes that the microcosm of the self reflects the macrocosm of society. By understanding themselves, they gain insight into the human condition as a whole. But self-reflection alone is not enough. The lone wolf must also develop a keen sense of observation, an ability to see the world as it truly is, not as they wish it to be. This requires a willingness to challenge one's own assumptions, to look beyond surface appearances, to question the narratives that society presents as truth. This combination of self-reflection and keen observation leads to a kind of double consciousness. The lone wolf exists simultaneously within society and apart from it. They participate in social interactions, they fulfill their roles and responsibilities, but they never fully buy into the collective delusion. They maintain a critical distance, a perspective that allows them to see the hidden patterns and structures that shape human behavior. This double consciousness can be a heavy burden. It can lead to a sense of alienation, a feeling of being out of step with the world around them. The lone wolf often feels like a stranger in a strange land, speaking a language that others can't understand. This is the source of their loneliness, the price they pay for their insight. But this loneliness also serves a purpose. It creates a space for deep thinking, for the kind of sustained concentration that is necessary for true creativity and innovation. In solitude, the lone wolf can hear their own thoughts, can follow the thread of an idea to its logical conclusion without the constant interruptions and distractions of social life. This is where the true power of the lone wolf emerges. In this solitary space, they are free to think the unthinkable, to challenge the unchallengeable. They can explore ideas that others dismiss as impossible or heretical. They can push the boundaries of what is known and accepted, venturing into uncharted intellectual territory. But with this freedom comes responsibility. The lone wolf must be careful not to become lost in their own thoughts, not to become so detached from reality that their insights lose their relevance. They must find a way to bridge the gap between their inner world and the outer world, to translate their unique perspective into something that others can understand and benefit from. This is where purpose comes into play. The lone wolf is not driven by a desire for personal gain or recognition. They are driven by a sense of purpose, a conviction that their insights and abilities can contribute something of value to the world. This purpose gives direction to their solitary explorations, provides a framework for their thoughts and actions. But purpose is not something that is given to us. It's not something we discover, like a hidden treasure. Purpose is something we create, something we forge through our choices and actions. The lone wolf must actively cultivate their sense of purpose, must continually refine and redefine it as they grow and evolve. This process of cultivating purpose requires a delicate balance. On one hand, the lone wolf must have the courage to pursue their vision, even when others don't understand or approve. They must be willing to take risks, to fail, to face criticism and rejection. On the other hand, they must remain open to feedback, must be willing to adjust their course when necessary. They must avoid the trap of ego, the temptation to believe that they alone have all the answers. This balance between conviction and flexibility, between self-belief and humility, is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the lone wolf's journey. It requires a level of self-awareness and emotional intelligence that few people ever achieve. It requires the ability to hold seemingly contradictory ideas in mind simultaneously, to navigate the gray areas between certainty and doubt. But for those who can master this balance, the rewards are immense. They gain a kind of inner freedom that few people ever experience. They become capable of thinking and acting in ways that others can scarcely imagine. They become catalysts for change, agents of innovation, beacons of possibility in a world that often seems mired in mediocrity and conformity. Yet even as they reach these heights, the lone wolf never loses sight of their own humanity. They understand that their exceptional qualities do not make them superior to others, but rather give them a greater responsibility to contribute to the common good. They recognize that their insights and abilities are not solely for their own benefit, but are gifts to be shared with the world. This brings us to a fundamental paradox of the lone wolf's existence. Even as they stand apart from the collective, they are ultimately working towards the betterment of that collective. Their solitary journey is not an end in itself, but a means to an end. The lone wolf's ultimate goal is not to remain alone, but to blaze a trail that others can follow, to expand the boundaries of what is possible for all of humanity. In the next part of our exploration, we'll examine how the lone wolf navigates the practical challenges of living in a society that often misunderstands and fears their exceptionalism. We'll look at the strategies they use to protect their autonomy while still engaging with the world, and the ways in which they can use their unique perspective to effect positive change. Are you ready to confront the practical realities of the lone wolf's existence? Are you prepared to grapple with the challenges and opportunities that come with standing apart from the crowd? The lone wolf exists in a state of perpetual tension with society. This tension is not just external, manifesting in conflicts with others or institutions, but also internal, a constant struggle to maintain one's integrity in the face of societal pressures. It's a delicate dance, a balancing act that requires immense skill and awareness. The first challenge the lone wolf faces is the pressure to conform. Society, by its very nature, seeks to normalize behavior, to create predictable patterns that allow for smooth functioning. This is not inherently malicious. It's a natural consequence of human beings living together in large groups. But for the lone wolf, this pressure to conform can feel like a straitjacket, a constraint on their ability to think and act freely. To navigate this pressure, the lone wolf must develop a strong sense of self. They must know, with absolute clarity, who they are and what they stand for. This self-knowledge becomes their anchor, their point of reference in a world that constantly tries to shape them into something they're not. It allows them to engage with society on their own terms, to participate without losing themselves. But self-knowledge alone is not enough. The lone wolf must also develop the skill of strategic conformity. This doesn't mean compromising their values or beliefs, but rather learning when to blend in and when to stand out. It's about choosing their battles wisely, recognizing which social norms are worth challenging and which are simply not worth the energy to fight. This strategic conformity requires a deep understanding of social dynamics. The lone wolf must become a keen observer of human behavior, able to read the unspoken rules and expectations of any given situation. They must develop the ability to code switch, to adapt their language and behavior to different contexts without losing their essential self. But even as they navigate these social waters, the lone wolf must be careful not to fall into the trap of cynicism. It's easy, when one sees through the illusions and pretenses of society, to become disillusioned, to view all human interaction as a game of manipulation and deceit. This cynicism is a poison that can eat away at the lone wolf's sense of purpose and connection to humanity. Instead, the lone wolf must cultivate a sense of compassionate detachment. They must recognize that most people are simply doing the best they can with the tools they have. The conformity that the lone wolf finds stifling is, for many, a source of comfort and security. By understanding this, the lone wolf can maintain their critical perspective without losing their empathy for others. This compassionate detachment also allows the lone wolf to build meaningful relationships despite their differences with others. It's a common misconception that lone wolves are inherently antisocial or misanthropic. In reality, many lone wolves deeply value connection and community. The challenge is finding or creating spaces where they can be fully themselves while still engaging with others. These spaces often take the form of what we might call communities of excellence. These are groups of like-minded individuals who share the lone wolf's commitment to growth, authenticity, and purpose. These communities might be professional networks, artistic collectives, or simply groups of friends who challenge and support each other. Within these communities, the lone wolf can find a sense of belonging without sacrificing their individuality. They can engage in the kind of deep, meaningful conversations that they crave. They can collaborate on projects that align with their values and vision. They can find mentors who understand their journey and protégés whom they can guide. But even as they find their tribe, the lone wolf must be careful not to become too comfortable. The danger of any community, even one of exceptional individuals, is that it can become an echo chamber. The lone wolf must maintain their critical faculties, must continue to question and challenge even within their chosen circle. This brings us to another key challenge for the lone wolf: maintaining intellectual and emotional independence. In a world awash with information and opinions, it's all too easy to be swayed by the latest trend or the most charismatic voice. The lone wolf must develop a strong internal compass, a set of principles and values that guide their thinking and decision-making. This independence of mind requires rigorous intellectual discipline. The lone wolf must be willing to do the hard work of thinking things through for themselves, of examining issues from multiple angles, of seeking out diverse perspectives. They must be willing to change their mind when presented with compelling evidence, but also to stand firm in their convictions when they believe they're right. But intellectual independence is not enough. The lone wolf must also cultivate emotional independence. This doesn't mean becoming cold or detached, but rather developing the ability to regulate one's own emotions without relying on external validation. It means finding sources of fulfillment and meaning that don't depend on the approval of others. This emotional independence is particularly crucial when the lone wolf faces criticism or rejection, which they inevitably will. When you stand apart from the crowd, when you challenge accepted norms or push boundaries, you become a target. People will misunderstand you, fear you, try to tear you down. The lone wolf must develop the resilience to withstand these attacks without losing their sense of self or purpose. But resilience doesn't mean becoming hardened or closed off. The lone wolf must remain open, must continue to engage with the world even in the face of adversity. They must find ways to transmute the pain of rejection or misunderstanding into fuel for growth and creativity. This openness extends to the lone wolf's relationship with their own ideas and beliefs. Even as they stand firm in their convictions, they must remain open to new information, new perspectives. They must be willing to admit when they're wrong, to learn from their mistakes. This requires a level of intellectual humility that can be challenging for individuals who are used to relying on their own judgment. But it's precisely this combination of conviction and openness, of independence and engagement, that allows the lone wolf to effect real change in the world. By standing apart, they gain a unique perspective. By engaging thoughtfully, they can share that perspective in ways that others can understand and appreciate. This is where the lone wolf's true power lies, in their ability to bridge worlds, to translate complex ideas into actionable insights, to challenge the status quo while offering viable alternatives. The lone wolf becomes a catalyst for change, a spark that can ignite new ways of thinking and being in the world. But with this power comes great responsibility. The lone wolf must be acutely aware of the impact of their words and actions. They must consider the potential consequences of their ideas, must strive to use their unique perspective for the greater good. In our final segment, we'll explore how the lone wolf can harness their exceptionalism to make a lasting positive impact on the world. We'll examine the strategies they can use to communicate their ideas effectively, to build coalitions for change, and to leave a legacy that extends beyond their individual journey. Are you prepared to confront the ultimate challenge of the lone wolf, transforming individual exceptionalism into collective progress? Are you ready to explore how the solitary path can lead to profound social change?